And I want to introduce Dr. Albert LaSpada. He's from Duke University, and he was newly selected as Director of Neuroregeneration and Neurotherapeutics. He's a professor at Duke and also the Vice Chair of the Department of Neurology. And Dr. Gülin Öz, she is an imaging specialist in magnetic resonance spectroscopy. I keep wanting to say MRI, but it's MRS, at the University of Minnesota. It's a non-invasive way of reading chemicals and neurotransmitters in the brain that could help eventually lead to early onset detection of ataxia. Please welcome Dr. Oz and Dr. LaSpada.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So we are tasked with my co-chair, Dr. LaSpada, to give you a quick overview of the AIM meeting that started on Monday, what we have discussed, what were some of the highlights. So if I can have the slides. Okay. And I'll do the first about 15 minutes, and Al will take over the last 15 minutes, and then we'll finish up together. So here's our disclaimer. We do receive some funding from pharmacy. So I did this last time. I think it's a nice way to show how these Ataxia Investigators meetings have evolved. I started coming to the AIMS in 2008. Unfortunately, I have pictures starting in 2010, Chicago meeting. Here's me and Al at that meeting. And just look at these pictures and tell me if you can pick up how they have evolved. So here's 2012, 2014, 2016, and this is the last one. We couldn't even fit everyone in. Here's this person, unfortunately, cut in the middle. Any trends that you notice? Yep. So here we are in 2005, where there were 50 investigators. And these are biannual meetings, and here we are in 2018. The last two AIMS attracted about 170 investigators from around the world. That is more than tripling. This is good news. So, and those people, even though this is the National Ataxia Foundation sponsored AIM meeting, this is a highly international meeting. So we had this time 169 attendees from 13 different countries shown here. This is intercontinental. And I can't tell you enough, I can't emphasize enough how important this is to actually initiate, launch international efforts. We started doing over the last year intercontinental imaging studies, for example, that we had not done previously. We were doing our work in the United States, our European colleagues were doing their work, and now we have some common grant mechanisms where we will join our hands, and this is really the only way we can do some very rigorous, serious work that can affect the worldwide population. So this is very exciting. So another important piece here was that more than half of the attendees were first-time attendees. That means we are attracting new investigators to this field. About half were junior investigators. That's big. We need new blood, new ideas, new types of new questions coming from fresh minds. It's also important to notice that National Institutes of Health highly supports this work. We had representatives from 2 institutes at the NIH, and they sponsor our meeting, and they give us a lot of valuable feedback on where we are going. This is another important piece, the number of sponsors other than NAF. So this includes industry sponsors, other patient organizations, as well as NIH institutes. So this historic data is from Sue Hagen. They started out with 4 non-NAF sponsors, and now we are at 17. That shows you the level of interest. Perhaps most critically, the industry representation at the meeting has increased a lot. So we had 25 attendees. This is 15% of the attendees coming from industry. They were representing 14 companies. What does that mean? They are either currently working on some ataxia treatments or are very interested in initiating work in these areas. And 10 of them actually sponsored the meeting. So that's pretty big. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Al now.
We have another microphone in case we need it. Okay. So I'm just going to continue and try and go into greater detail in terms of the substance of the meeting, in terms of the science and some of the themes that we emphasize, just to give you guys a very brief sense of that. So there were really 4 main goals of this particular meeting. One was to sort of engage in an up-to-date review of cutting-edge research, so everyone gets caught up on what are the most important emerging ideas in the ataxia field. The other thing was to share strategies for ataxia research between different medical centers. As you just learned, we have mostly people from the U.S., but we have many, many investigators from across the world, many from Europe in particular, but also from Asia as well. We wanted to identify the most important topics in ataxia research because we want to move this field forward as quickly as possible. And a very important theme that was already touched on by Dr. Oz is we want to cultivate the next generation of ataxia researchers and clinicians, and we want to connect them up with you guys, with ataxia patients. So in terms of cutting-edge research, one thing we emphasized in our first theme was basic cerebellar function, and this idea that the neurons that degenerate in disease, they don't sort of exist in a vacuum, but they're communicating with other neurons in the central nervous system and also with other types of cells, because your brain actually, only 10% of it is made up of neurons, and most of the cells in your brain are what are called glia, and they play a special role. I won't go into the details, but we emphasize the relationship of these cells to the neurons in terms of understanding how the cerebellum works and how it dysfunctions. Also, a major theme was to identify therapeutic targets, and at this meeting we talked about the role of DNA damage, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction. And another important thing is to make models so that when we have ideas about new therapies, we can test them in these models. So we talked about the importance of mouse models and what makes them good and what makes them not so good, and then using human stem cell models where we make neurons from your skin cells using an advanced technology that was developed just really a few years ago, but now has come into the mainstream of our research. Another important goal was, in terms of sharing therapeutic strategies, was to talk about getting ready for clinical trials and also drug development for rare diseases. So really to position ourselves to be able to have the most effective possible trials of new drug therapies as they become available. And it's important to note we have had, between the last meeting and this meeting, our first real ataxia clinical trial, and the results of that trial that was led by the company Biohaven were reported at this meeting we just had. So in terms of some highlights, again, cultivating the next generation of researchers, we can't emphasize how important that is because we want to bring the best people into the field. You know, because there's a lot of bright people, medical students and researchers, PhD researchers. They could work on anything. We want to show them that this is a vibrant and important topic where they'll have opportunities and can make a difference. So we want to bring trainees in contact with patients, and I think we did that through a few different venues, as you'll hear. We wanted to emphasize that we valued the contribution of young people, so they gave half the talks at this meeting, actually. And for the first time at this meeting, we had a little pre-meeting where we had trainees come together into what we call a trainee network program, and that was really exceedingly successful. Dr. Oz organized that, and the people who participated were thrilled, and they asked for more. So I'm quite confident that we will do it when we have this meeting again in 2 years. And overall, the goal here was to just empower these trainees to feel like they could really come into this field and make a difference. In terms of identifying the most important topics in this ataxia research field, well, you know, we had internationally renowned award-winning researchers who presented at this meeting. I mean, we had some of the big names in the field who came to this meeting. The topics were wide-ranging. We covered new areas that had never been discussed before at the prior meetings to show you how dynamic, you know, the research is in this field. And we added 2 debate sessions where you know, 2 sets of our esteemed colleagues debated important and controversial issues in the field of ataxia research and therapy development. And that was spirited, it was fun, but most of all, it was really informative and instructive. And again, establishing future leaders of ataxia research, we have this Hot Chairs program where we can get 12 individuals to come up and briefly talk about their work, you know, adding more opportunities for individuals to do that, and all but one of those individuals were early stage investigators or trainees. And of course, the thing that you know, we feel very passionately about is having our trainees come into contact with patients. So really they understand, you know, what they're doing. You know, they're working in labs, they have tissue and other biological samples and test tubes. It's very impersonal. But when they meet people and they understand, you know, where these samples come from, why, you know, they're doing this work, why they're working these long hours, it really is very motivating for them. And so at the Thursday night dinner, we had, you know, obviously all the trainees were there for this, and we had ataxia patients and families, and we had 3 presentations. This was the first time that many of our trainees ever heard how patients think and how they feel about their disease, and I can assure you that the response was uniform. The words I heard over and over again was that this was inspirational and this was motivating. So, you know, it was really, I think, a highlight of the meeting for our trainees. And we also had a poster session yesterday where patients and families were able to come and see, you know, what our trainees are doing in terms of their research, and again, an opportunity to meet with them one-on-one. I thought it was very well attended and very valuable. And so now I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Oz, who's going to take us out here.
So this picture that I stole off the internet is just to give you an idea about the complexity of what we are trying to do. So this is just a representation of what of the scales of the brain, and to tell you that at this meeting we have people who are working on a single cell basis, for example, investigating ways that neighboring neurons communicate with each other. Then there are people who look at circuits, how this part of your brain talks to this part, or how your cerebellum talks to the rest of your brain. And then this is again a network idea, from synapses to layers of your cerebellum to the whole brain level. And then we have a lot of people who work at the whole animals and whole humans. We have a lot of physician scientists who work at this level. And you do really need to study the diseases and understand at all those different levels. Now, having people working on such different levels and with such varied backgrounds, we have biologists, geneticists, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, engineers come here, we don't really speak each other's language. We are all scientists, but I'm not well versed in genetics language, for example, or my colleagues may not be well versed in imaging language that we use on a day-to-day basis. So we really learn how to speak each other's language and how to communicate, understand the issues with other techniques and other approaches that our colleagues take. So this is really a wonderful opportunity for all these people with all these different diverse backgrounds to get together and work on the same ultimate goal, to bring some treatments. And we do shape each other's research. My research has evolved over the years because of the feedback I got from my physician scientist colleagues and from my basic geneticist, molecular biologist colleagues. So that it really does take a village to grow a scientist and then to allow them and support them to flourish. So I'd like to tell you about the future aim that Al will chair. These are tentative dates and tentative location that will be in 2020. This was our steering committee. We had a larger than usual committee this time, but it was great. We had a great mixture of earlier investigators and senior investigators, basic scientists and physician scientists, and I think it worked quite well. We had, I really enjoyed preparing this program with all of them. And, of course, NAF staff and volunteers like David, who takes beautiful pictures. Without their help, this meeting is not possible. And Sue, Sue's contribution, I cannot emphasize it. I mean, without her, AIM doesn't exist. So, few words on how you can help. I'm sure during the exhibitors area at this meeting you have heard about the registry courts. Your participation in that is highly, highly important. Check out clinicaltrials.gov for ongoing trials. These may be treatment trials or other multi-site initiatives to understand natural history of these diseases, how they progress with imaging markers, for example. Check those out. And NAF has a nice website, How You Can Help, so that's a very good resource. And then I have some pictures here from a beautiful hike we took to help raise funds for NAF. This was the 6460 campaign last year. I think this year it's called Go the Extra Mile. And you can see we had a couple of members of the AIM organizing committee here, Maria and myself, and our families. And this gentleman here is standing in the back there, Larry Scott, whose uncle founded NAF, and he did this hike, 60-mile hike, at the age of 80. So with determination, you can help in many different ways. This organization support this research. And thank you very much for supporting the research and inspiring us. Thanks.